Greetings, my name's Andrew Sumner. My grandfather, Pop Smythe, bought me my first comic book in Liverpool, England, when I was 3 years old, and I spent the next 50 years hurtling around the pop culture kaleidoscope, first as a fan, and then as a journalist, editor, publisher and presenter. Along the way, I met a bunch of interesting people who will be joining me here, creators, performers, professionals and public servants. We live in divisive, fractured times, but art and popular culture connect people from all viewpoints and from all walks of life. I'm often struck by the passions people enjoy, that they can set aside their differences for and agree on whatever those passions are, whether I share them or not. And that spark, that moment of instinctive, connective agreement, that's what I call a hard agree. Yeah, that's that gun right there. And what he's done, you know, he's walked throughout the land brilliantly, coming across as the affable side of the ruling class, getting everybody to call him by his first name, embracing that and acting the lovable buffoon. Yeah. But actually, he is truly, truly fucking dangerous. Do you know what I mean?
He's a nasty piece of work. I remember after the coalition ended, one of the two Liberal members of Cameron's cabinet, not the leader of the Liberals, but the other one, said that when he was asked about the Tories and what it was like to serve alongside this particular generation of Tories, and he said you could take David Cameron as an example, but really it doesn't matter which one. He said that individually they're quite charming, but collectively they're appalling.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
When those people get together and those nice, polite smiles and the debonair mannerisms and so on go by the wayside, and you see what they're really like, they're monsters.
Yeah, and that's fucking right. All those Bullingdon Club cunts, all of them, they've all been. They've all had this worldview inculcated in them that they're better than everybody else.
Yeah,
and they believe that. They absolutely believe it to their core.
Yeah.
They're genuinely unpleasant. It's like these people you hear go, well, I met Oswald Mosley once. Actually, we had quite a nice chat. You know what I mean? You can always take any of these people out of that environment. And because that's the human way, isn't it? When you meet people one-on-one, very few people, even if they're truly a monster, are going to call you a cunt to your face or slap you or something. It's just not like that. Human instinct is you want a positive response.
Who was the guy who used to do Letter from America? Was it Alistair
Cook? Yeah.
Alistair Cook's Letter from America. He had an anecdote about being at a party at the American Embassy in Berlin in the 30s and somebody knocking into him and spilling his drink and apologizing, my dear chap, let me get you another drink. And it was Hitler. But you can say, I'm so sorry. Please, waiter, get this man.
Okay. Let's just get straight into it, mate. Yes. Yeah, so Garth, how you doing, mate?
Pretty good, Andrew. How about you?
I am very well, thank you, mate. Very well indeed. Braving the cold to have this conversation and just been highly amused by the conversation about the global political catastrophe that we've just been having before we started recording this.
Yes. Love what you've done with the place. But...
yeah, that's right. Thank you very much. Kudos not to me, but to some of my fellow country persons who I won't get into resuscitating all that again. So you're working on a whole flotilla of new books at the moment. Mm-hmm. What can you tell me about some of them? I'm thinking that could we start with talking about some of the Aftershock books?
Sure. I've got two new books for Aftershock that I'm working on. One is a sequel to Jimmy's Bastards, which it's called Jimmy's Little Bastards.
Yeah,
more James Bond type shenanigans. And the other one is a war story called The Lion and the Eagle. And that's one about the Chindits in Burma in 1944, which is one I've wanted to tackle for a while. So those will be, I've only just started them. I imagine they'll both be out sometime next year.
Wow, amazing. So obviously I'm like a big fan of what you do with your war books, and that's part of what we're going to talk about in a sec. Jimmy's Bastards, of course, had I really enjoyed the first series of that, which had that I don't want to give it away for anybody who hasn't read it, but it has that brilliant sort of narrative flip part of the way through. Yeah. How did, without spoiling it too much, how did that world come to you? What was the jumping off point for creating that in the first place?
I think it all revolves around exactly the turn that the story takes that you're talking about, because when you think of James Bond, I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan of the character. Every couple of years I go and see the movies, and then I kind of forget them, and then I carry on. It's fantasy, it's nonsense, it's highly enjoyable nonsense, really. But there is something interesting in the idea somewhere, and of course, with the idea I had for the first series, which is that all his legitimate offspring, all of Jimmy's bastards, come to get him at once. And they have that particularly unpleasant plan to get him that the whole thing revolves around, that I won't actually mention for anyone who hasn't read the book. That was really the starting point. What if all of Bond's kids, who he's abandoned, he probably was out the window the next morning, what if they all grew up and came to get him? And if they did, how would they get him? And it was very much a let the punishment fit the crime kind of thing.
Yeah.
And apart from that, it's a chance to sort of take all the James Bond tropes and have fun with them.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I think, the thing that works about it. It starts off very much like what you kind of expect your take on the Bond genre to be, and then of course it's those who are well versed in like reading your work. I think the great thing about what happens in that book is that's not a turn that I would have guessed, and actually it can be a bit of a rough read in some respects, you know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
And I say this to somebody who isn't a prude and is not easily shocked, but I did very much enjoy it. Can you give us a flavour of what Jimmy's Little Bastards is gonna do? What's that gonna explore?
Well, you'll see if in fact you look at the end of the first series, you get a hint about what happens in the new series.
Okay.
But essentially, someone else decides to have a pop.
Yeah.
Jimmy, of course, Jimmy's not in great shape anyway, because the first series left a bit of a diminished character.
Yeah.
And his partner Nancy, she had to kind of take over. Well, that's where we see them at the start of the new series, as a new threat looms for Jimmy. More than that, actually, in the same way as I can't say too much about the first series, because it blows the big reveal, and it's the same as that, really. I can't tell you too much about the new one, or the twist that the whole thing revolves around will be given away.
Yeah. I mean, mate, that makes complete sense. And then of course you got your other kind of big new series, I guess, is Marjorie Finnegan, Temporal Criminal.
That's right.
Which is a wonderful title. So what
that one?
Tell us about that.
Well, that one's what it sounds like. It's about this girl, Marjorie Finnegan, who is a temporal criminal who just races up and down the timelines, stealing stuff. And it's a comedy. It's pretty action-packed. The artist is Goran Sudzuka.
Yeah.
Who's a terrific artist. I worked with him on a very different book called A Walk Through Hell, which was a very bleak horror book.
Yeah.
But Goran's one of those artists that can really turn his hand to anything, and he's done a terrific job on this. So plenty of action, plenty of laughs. Marjorie herself is quite a character. She's maybe a little bit touched, Marge. Really, she's out for fun. She likes the treasure, the shiny gleamies, as she calls them, but really she's out for fun. Having access to time travel technology and being able to go anywhere and do anything has maybe gone to her head a little bit.
Yeah.
And she soon finds the Temporal Police Department's #1 agent on her tail, and of course hijinks ensue. Yeah. And there's an evil plot, an evil scheme underway by unimaginably appalling villains too, which of course the two of them stumble across.
So it's all the classic Ennis ingredients with some time travel layered over it.
Yeah, I remember. I think actually what provoked it more than anything else was I was watching that show Vikings. Have you seen that?
Yeah, right on. Yeah.
Good stuff. And I was watching a scene where the long ship shows up in the fjord and everyone shits themselves. Oh no, Vikings! Yeah. And I found myself thinking, one shot from a decent sized gun and you could blow that thing out of the water in seconds, which is a completely irrational thing to think when you're watching a story about Vikings. But sometimes when I'm watching historical dramas, I think, if you could just hurry up and invent the machine gun, the aeroplane,
right.
The heavy artillery, all your problems would be solved. And the scene that then played out in my head kind of formed the basis for Marjorie Finnegan.
Yeah. I mean, I get that. And of course, it would be such a satisfying thing to be able to do in that moment, to pull out the Gatling gun, to pull out the rocket launcher.
Yes, of course. And you know, people have done that. I'm aware that, you know, stories like that have appeared before. I just wanted to do my take on it. And I also wanted to explore the notion of how do you fix it if there's a nutcase like Marjorie running around stealing things and, you know, blasting anyone who tries to kill her while she's up to her fun and games. What if you're the one that has to come along afterwards and kind of put time back together so that, say, if she shoots somebody in the 4th century, their entire bloodline isn't wiped out and our present day is, you know the old thing, like you go back to the time of the dinosaurs, step on a baby brontosaurus and apes never develop into men.
Yeah,
you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, what if you're the one who has to fix that, you know, to clean up the mess behind the Temporal Criminal? And I got quite a bit of fun out of that, but you'll see when it comes out.
So who's publishing the book, Garth?
It's Upshot, which is, I believe, the actual company name for the artists, writers, and artisans.
Yeah,
they've got quite a few books. It's Axel Alonso's new.
Yeah, okay. Who's an old pal of yours, of course.
Yes, he is. He is. In fact, you know, myself and Rob Williams and a couple of others who have titles with it just tend to think of it as Axel's thing.
Yeah, right.
So, like it takes a minute or a few seconds. Oh, yes, that's right. Artists, writers, artisans, Upshot. Yeah, but really you're just thinking it's Axel's thing.
Yeah, got it. I spoke to Rob the other day, actually. Funnily enough, it was the first time I'd met him. You know, I'd never run into him before. You know, every now and again, you have those people knocking around the industry and you know them, but you never actually, it was just one of those things. But, you know, but he's a good bloke. He does some very interesting work. Yeah.
Yeah, and a good writer too.
Yeah, no, he is for sure. So Marjorie Finnegan, the Upshot guys are doing it. When is it coming out, do you know?
I think it starts in May.
Right on. Okay.
I believe. Goran's drawn about half of the run. It'll be 8 issues.
Yeah.
And he's working on issue 5 now, so we should have plenty in the bank by the time the thing actually ships.
And is it going to be one and done, or is it designed so that it can...
It could go on.
Yeah.
You know, it could. At the minute, I'm kind of happy with it as it is, but not impossible that it could continue.
Yeah, nice one. And to go back to The Lion and the Eagle, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So that's your Aftershock Burma book. So interestingly, you should mention that my oldest friend, who is the now retired fire boss of Liverpool, who I grew up with, his dad was in Burma and was actually in a Burmese prison camp.
Oh, right.
And really went through the ringer before he came back home. And I've heard some of those stories when I was a kid, and it's pretty harrowing shit, to be honest.
Yeah.
So how did what was it about the conflict in Burma that spoke to you about that series? Why was that something you wanted to look at?
I think it's been on my mind for quite a while. Most of my war stories, World War II stories, have involved the European War. Yeah. I've touched on it before. I wrote one called Dear Billy. I wrote another one called The Tokyo Club. But this one, which is directly about the war in Burma between the British and the Japanese. This is one that I think I wanted to do because I want to cover as many of the kind of disparate elements of that war, aspects of that war, as I possibly can, not just the kind of almost multinational elements that made up the British Army, but also the Indians and the Gurkhas. And there was a Nigerian unit, I believe, the Americans and the Chinese who, under Stilwell, who are getting involved as well. So there's that. There's the sheer savagery of it. But at this point, you know, the Japanese had behaved with a kind of a brutality that was rarely seen elsewhere in the war. You mentioned the prisoner of war camps. It's interesting, when you read the memoirs by the guys who went through those camps, inevitably you get to the bit where the guy will say something like, as bad as we had it and as bad as the Japanese treated us, it was nothing to the way they treated the locals. Yeah. The Burmese, or the Chinese, or whoever it was unfortunate enough to have been invaded by the Japanese. I mean, they treated them worse than animals. And what they got up to in China in particular, which is one of the things the story touches on, is horror beyond imagination.
Yeah.
Really. So these are all the things that went into this story. And briefly, the Chindits were a British unit recruited from the regular British Army to be a long-range penetration force, a sort of embryonic special forces unit who would go behind the Japanese lines, cause havoc. And there's always been a good deal of controversy over exactly how much they achieved. There have been questions about the notion of special forces from the very beginning, essentially revolving around the idea or the question, if you go to all the other units in your army and you take the very best troops for your special forces outfit, what does that do to those other units who, at the end of the day, make up the vast majority of the army and have to, instead of the cool black ops and secret missions that the special forces guys do, they're the ones that have to do the unglamorous, but frankly more important work of meeting the enemy army on the battlefield and smashing it.
Yeah.
What are you really doing with the special forces thing? And it's that balancing act that the very notion of SF has kind of revolved around ever since its inception.
That's very interesting.
And that's something I want to look at in the story as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Now, war, quite rightly, is one of the genres and one of the kind of narrative sources that you're very well known for in an era when there aren't that many people within the comics business certainly writing about the war anymore. You and I grew up in an era where in the UK there was a shitload of war comics, and what's the genesis of you identifying so much with that genre and being so interested in writing about it? What was your kind of first exposure to World War II, and where did your interest in it come from?
I think that just as almost everyone else in the industry read their superhero comics, loved them, grew up, and then when they got into the industry wanted to write and or draw them, I didn't read superhero comics as a kid. I had mostly war comics, also 2000 AD, but it was mostly war comics. So it's just that same notion of wanting to do the things you read as a kid, but as an adult.
Yeah.
The difference being that with war comics, of course, you find out that these stories are actually based on reality.
Yeah.
It's not like Superman and Batman and Spider-Man, which are fantasy and always will be. You'll never meet anyone like that. They will never exist. You find out that the stories in things like Battle and Commando and War Picture Library and so on actually allowing for the massive hyperbole that was applied to those stories, stories, were based on things that happened. You come to understand that. You see the movies, you see the documentaries, you read the books. For me, it sparked an interest in military history that sort of, I think, receded a bit in my teenage years, but reappeared in my late 20s.
Yeah.
So that when I'd enjoyed a bit of commercial success with Preacher and Punisher and so on, and people were saying, whatever you want to do next, we'll take, it was war stories. I'll do war stories. That was my thing from childhood. It's just that it had been more of a roundabout route than it is for a lot of people in the business.
And now that's very interesting. Of course, since then, since having that opportunity and doing like the war stories books for Vertigo, and then you've managed with various publishers to, the analogy for me would be to like create blockbusters and then take some time out to do their personal projects. That's essentially your relationship with the war genre now, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a lot of it is opportunism. If a new publisher comes to me, or any publisher comes to me, independent usually, and says, we would love to get a project from you, well, I'll typically say to them, okay, if you want to wait for the next, what would you say, sort of broadly speaking, Preacher-esque adventure, the stuff I'm known for, the kind of crazy, over-the-top, action-packed stuff, or the grim as hell horror material, you can wait, because those come along rather infrequently. I have to wait for the thing to percolate in my head, like Marjorie, like A Walk Through Hell.
Yeah.
Or I have about half a dozen war stories that I could start tomorrow. You choose. And generally, what they'll do is they'll take a war story, knowing that if we can establish a good working relationship on that, I can then bring them something else later on. That's the way it was with Aftershock. They began with Dreaming Eagles, which is my Tuskegee Airmen book with Simon Colby. And from that, we established the relationship that got Jimmy's Bastards going and the Walk Through Hell going and so on.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a great way to do it. And with the success you've had, you're in that lucky position of being able to use that chip, which gives you what you want. And in fact, thinking about it, that we first met working on a war book, which was the Battle of Britain series that I did with Wildstorm when I was at IPC, right? Which I love the way that turned out. And I remember you saying at the time that you had a second story in you. It didn't come to pass, but I would have loved to have seen that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose Rebellion must have it now, right?
They've definitely got it now, mate. They've definitely got it.
So I mean, I could do another Battler. I could do more Johnny Red.
Yeah, I would love to see more Johnny Red. I thought the Johnny Red that you did, which you did for the current place I work, Titan, that turned out really well. Actually, if you know the character, you must have been pleased with what you did there, because I know he was always a favourite of yours.
I was delighted. I really was. I mean, that couldn't have worked out better. Largely because of Keith Burns.
Yeah, right on.
Having him on it, he made it, because if you're going to do Johnny Red, I think you're going to need an artist who lives and breathes that stuff the same way I do, and who's going to be able to produce artwork on the same level as Joe Colquhoun and John Cooper. You're going to have something that lives up to them, and Keith can do that. He is, as I've said before, he's the artist I was waiting for all those years, really. The guy who thinks about that stuff the same way I do. He has the stuff living in his head the way I do.
Yeah. What I loved about that book, and this isn't really a spoiler because of the nature of what that book is. I love the way you kind of gave Johnny a happy ending of sorts, which is basically something I always assumed would elude him. You know what I mean? As a reader and as a big fan also. Also, I think the thing about Burns is that he gave Johnny like a brutishness in his appearance, which I think it was absolutely spot on the minute I saw it. I thought, yeah, that's right. That feels right to me.
Yes, I think so. I mean, Colquhoun always drew him as a sort of little backstreet scrapper, which is what he was. He was a scouser, and he went into the Air Force with a chip on his shoulder. And Cooper made him more of a kind of a tough guy, traditional hero, like a bigger bloke. I think Keith found a nice halfway between the two. You might see some more Johnny Red soon.
Brilliant, mate!
As much as I can say on that, you might see some more soon.
That makes me a very happy man, mate. That's awesome. Yeah. Now that we're talking about war and comics, how much did you ever do much of a retrospective dive into the DC war books? And the reason I'm mentioning those is that clearly the Marvel war books are nonsense. They're essentially, as are the Marvel Westerns, they are basically superhero books that just happen to be set with the Howling Command. I love Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, but it's not really. It seems to me that the DC war books are much more of a kind of a legitimate attempt at telling serious war stories than the Marvel books were. Did you ever get into those very much? Were you familiar with any of them?
I didn't know them as a kid, for the same reason I didn't know the other DC titles. I wrote a couple of things towards the end of the 90s. I wrote Enemy Ace, and I wrote Unknown Soldier. Yeah. And I've done a couple of Marvel characters as well. There was the Phantom Eagle.
Yeah, I remember that.
Really, once I was able to do my own war stories, there didn't seem to be as much need. I mean, the DC titles are interesting. The art is fantastic. Not Kanigher, he wrote it.
Yeah, Cubits, and Russ Heath, Cubit and Russ Heath, amazing.
Yeah, but the books themselves, because they were done under the code, Kanigher is sort of, he's constantly constrained by not being able to show really the reality of what's going on in a way that they were able to do on Battle and Commando. Not saying that those were, X-rated gore fests or anything, but they were able to, push it to boundaries a bit more. Once I got into doing my own war stuff, I really kind of left that behind. The exception, funnily enough, would be with The Punisher, who I was able to do Vietnam stories with.
Yeah.
And Nick Fury, who I did a kind of a Cold War book with.
Yeah.
With those two, I was able to write war stories that I think were every bit as near the knuckle as anything I've done in independent comics.
Yeah, mate, as a reader and, a fan, I agree. I mean, I love those series. I thought I'd see more of those Fury books you did anytime. I thought they worked out really well.
You might just be seeing something soon. I mean, I've mentioned this before, so Marvel won't be too upset if I do, but there will be another Vietnam Punisher book, which Nick Fury will feature in, and it will kind of pick up after the events of the Fury series from a few years ago.
That's fucking brilliant, mate. My hope is that every time I mention something I want to see, that you are then going to go, yes, that's the talisman for you going, yes, I'm actually doing it. Because I'd love to see it. By the way, given how close you were to Steve Dillon, something I've always been amazed hasn't been reprinted by Marvel US in some way, shape or form, is that Nick Fury strip he did for the Hulk comic when he was 16. And he did I think off the top of my head, it's about 20 weeks worth of 2-page stories. I presume you've seen it, right, mate?
Oh yeah, I've seen it because everyone points to that and goes, "Christ, look what he could do when he was 16."
It's amazing, right?
I do not know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe because it's Nick Fury, and there's only ever limited interest in that character. Anyway, and maybe because he's the old Nick Fury rather than the Sam Jackson one. Although, to be honest with you, I have no idea where Marvel is at with that stuff anymore. Anyway, I do not know.
Yeah, no, I mean it's interesting because that is a series. That's a series that if you ever speak to a hardcore Marvel fan of a certain age who's American, they're nearly always shocked by his existence and they don't know it exists. It's generally really unknown outside of people like my age, your age, who might have actually read that book when they were a kid over here in the UK. Nobody else knows it, you know what I mean? But the story's not brilliant, but the artwork's beautiful.
Yeah, it'd be worth reprinting just on that basis alone.
I think just for the significance of Steve's career, and to flip into the another DC war book I was just going to ask you about is if you'd ever read it was. So there's the Kanigher and Kubert / John Severin series, The Losers, the original iteration of The Losers, which itself was a conglomerate of 3 different war books that had sort of come to an end. And they put the lead characters of each of those, if not books, those series into a disparate unit together. So you've got you've got Captain Storm and Johnny Cloud, the Navajo Air Race, and you've got Gunner and Sarge. Put them in a series together. And there was quite a lot of incident in that book, right? And there's beautiful artwork by Severin. But the thing I want to ask you about is there was at the time unpopular 12 months of that strip where Kanigher and all the regular war guys came off it. And it was actually written and drawn by Kirby. Have you ever seen that series?
No. That's the kind of thing that I'd have been unlikely to see. The more obscure you get in American comics, the further you
it's not your thing.
Yeah. Generally, I tend to know the stuff best that Alan Moore and people like that were working on back in the 80s and 90s. That's where my experience of American comics begins. The war stuff, I looked at a few old ones when I was doing the Ace and Unknown Soldier.
Yeah.
But while, I admired what I saw in terms of the artwork, at least, I haven't really gone into it in any great depth.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I think what's interesting about the reason I mentioned that series is because it's really unlike anything else Kirby did. Because Kirby, of course, say like Sam Fuller was a frontline infantryman during the war. And it's him trying to accurately document that experience via writing and drawing The Losers. He can't take the Jack Kirby bombast out of it. So it's not exactly realistic. and it's not even hyper realistic. It's still essentially, it owes a lot to his superhero work and that wild framing, but you can tell there's a level of authenticity in there, which is not necessarily the stuff about the Kanigher work that I found fascinating years later. Is I always assumed reading Kanigher's work that he fought in World War II. And he didn't. He was in the Coast Guard, right? Kubert and Joe Orlando, the editor, they fought. But I always assumed you were seeing the kind of the exaggerated like memoirs of somebody who's there. That's the kind of voice it had to me. But I guess it was their influence. But it's just interesting watching Kirby.
Bob Haney? I think.
Yeah, Bob Haney. Yeah, for sure.
He wrote a piece I read in which he talked briefly about his own war experience. I think he was an officer on a US destroyer in the Pacific. But he talks about coming to DC after the war and getting a job there. And he says something like, I'm paraphrasing here, but he says something like, I met the man in charge of their war comics department a half-insane little man who I soon realized had been turned on for war service. He had come up with a formula for war comics that had nothing to do with the reality of war, but it was a formula that worked.
Yeah.
And
yes.
Of course, he's talking about, which I thought summed the whole thing up quite nicely. Yeah. I mean, reading Kanigher stuff, reading all those comics, your description is one that rings true for me. I mean, it's full of bombast and hyperbole and unlikeliness, and I just can't really get into it for that reason. I think because of the war comics I read as a kid,
of course,
my idea of what a war story should be.
And of course, those UK books, particularly ones in Battle and Watch, they're much more humble. They're exaggerated, but and the commando stories, they're much more humble and reserved and like British in their depiction, and still rooted in the reality of everything, right?
Yeah, they're a lot more brutal too, generally.
Yes, absolutely. And
particularly with the commando and the picture library books, because those are self-contained stories, you cannot be sure at all that our hero is going to make it.
Yeah.
And quite a few times he doesn't. It's not to say that these are verite. It's not to say that these are the true face of war. They're just a little bit closer to it, I think, than the American stuff, which we must remember was constrained by the code. That's why Kanigher had to come up with this formula in the first place. What he might have done otherwise, that's an interesting speculation. But the British books of the 70s and 80s, I think, were a little bit. They were closer enough to reality, I think, to make them that bit more interesting for someone like me.
Yeah. I think that's well said. Before moving on, actually, you've made me think of something, which is Bob Haney is actually responsible for probably the wildest Sergeant Rock story ever. Which I don't know if you've ever seen this, but there's a famous issue of Brave and the Bold, the Batman team-up title, that was always written by Haney. It has amazing artwork by Jim Aparo, who could, his characters are always super masculine, and he could draw any hero and make him look good, right? And there's a Batman and Sergeant Rock team-up, which basically has a bunch of terrorists realizing that Haney and Aparo are creating the book. So they actually get involved with Haney and Aparo in real time during the story and basically take Aparo hostage. And Haney's got to figure out how to stop them taking Aparo hostage so he can finish the art on the book and whatnot. And it's genuinely enjoyable. 22 pages of nonsense.
I think Grant Morrison might have read that at some point.
I think you're right. I think he might have based 30 years of writing history on reading that story. So given your interest in the genre, do you have any particular favourite or? I
mean, just thinking back to the first war movies I would have seen as a kid, there were always on the one hand, you have the larger-than-life ones, the ones that Tarantino referred to as guys on a mission movies. He said that. Everyone knew exactly what he meant.
Yeah.
But in this context, it would be Where Eagles Dare and Kelly's Heroes and things like that. And then you have the ones that make a decent stab at trying to capture the campaign or the battle that they're that they're concerned with, like The Longest Day,
Yeah.
like A Bridge Too Far, like A Battle of Britain, like The Battle of Britain. These, of course, were the cast of thousands ones, where they get every movie star who's around at the time to do 5 minutes, and then they cut a movie together out of it. So John Wayne, Richard Burton, those would be the ones I started with, those two sort of veins of war movies. And, I love those to this day. And then in more recent times, I suppose, things like discovering some old classics like Ice Cold and Alex.
Yeah, it's such a great film, man. Yeah,
it is. But also some of the movies that were made in more recent times, long after the events concerned, like A Midnight Clear, which came out in 92 or 93, or When Trumpets Fade. These movies are much smaller in scale, but they're good movies. I would love to see someone try to do a decent British war movie of this kind, because that's something that seems to have been lost, that idea. The British will complain constantly about American war movies and the portrayal, of the Americans as the only victors, but the British film industry does absolutely nothing about this. It'll turn out stuff like Darkest Hour or The Imitation Game, which are just costume dramas set in, nicely appointed oak panel dining rooms and so on. They're also not exactly accurate, but that's another story. But I would love to see the British have a crack at a decent war movie, the way they used to in the 50s.
I completely agree with you, because I think there are some stories, I've thought for a long time that there are some key stories out there which are brilliant and have only ever been told as either part of one of those big all-star cast World War II movies, which I also love. And a thing I wanted to explore was the demarcation between those two, all singing, all dancing big cast movies, and then the Flights of Fancy Men on a Mission film, which I also love both of those things. And I think the interesting thing is that within some of the scenes within, say, A Bridge Too Far, within The Longest Day particularly, there is a complete movie in there which, if you made it now in the present day, you could adapt properly. Something like Pegasus Bridge, that's absolutely crying out for a movie to be made of it. And you can make such a great movie with contemporary British actors about Pegasus Bridge. It'd be awesome.
I mean, if you go to Pegasus Bridge, and I was in Normandy about 3 or 4 years ago and spent a week in that area, looking at the various different battlefields and beaches and so on. Pegasus Bridge is amazing because you see how close together they managed to put the 3 gliders down, and how close to the bridge, and the comparatively small bit of space in which the battle took place, with the British running out of ammo, praying for the tanks to arrive. Fortunately they do in the nick of time. Yeah, that would be a terrific film. I mean, the scenes in A Longest Day with Richard Todd, who, interestingly enough, was a British paratrooper on D-Day, and I think, plays a senior officer in his unit in the movie, in the actual unit he served in. You see the enormous pressure on him as he's exhorting his men to hang on a bit longer, and he's thinking, hold until relieved, because those were the orders he was given. I mean, that's just such a fantastic setup that you could hang a whole movie off.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I really couldn't. Are you a fan of the recent spate of Russian war movies?
I have not. I think I know you're talking about things like the White
Tiger. Yeah, the battle for the battle for Sevastopol, all those kind of flicks.
Right. I mean, I'm aware of them and I've seen bits of them, but I haven't really gotten into them properly, to be honest with you.
So I think you'd enjoy those if you check them out, because what the Russians are able to do, but something's encoded in their relatively bleak nature, I think, is that their war movies are genuinely anti-war in a way that even the best anti-war movies that have come out of the UK, out of Hollywood, it would seem to me, are never truly anti-war, because they're still exhilarating. And quite often, people you identify with are still alive at the end of the movie. And
Yeah,
it seems to me the trick to making something generally anti-war is you've got to see the people you identify with go through appalling times and not survive.
yes.
Because you need to feel that sense of devastation and loss. But the Russians excel in doing that. And so when you watch these movies, they are truly anti-war in a way that other movies about World War II, I've never experienced that sensation where I've switched the film off at the end in pretty much, say, the same frame of mind that I might have had watching like Requiem for a Dream or something, where you've gone, well, that was brilliant and I never want to watch it again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which I think there's a whole genre of movies in itself, which are, great films that you can only watch once because they're just too emotionally bleak.
I mean, one Russian film that I did see, although it's from quite a while back, is Come and See.
Okay.
If you're familiar with that, it's about a young boy who joins the Russian partisans behind the lines in World War II. And it's very grim, very bleak. There's a lot of, frankly, dead space in it, but there are a couple of sequences you see that exhibit a kind of brutality I've never experienced in a film before or since. Vicious stuff, and handled very matter-of-factly too, which somehow adds to the horror. So Come and See. That's one that I think it fits the idea of what you're talking about, because I don't really want to sit through that one again.
Yeah, no, it was actually Come and See was at the forefront of the ones I was thinking of in terms of I think that is a great film that you can't watch more than once, really, unless you've got something that's not quite connecting in your brain, because it's just too horrible to fucking watch. And again, I think the thing you've touched upon, the dispassionate, almost matter-of-fact way in which it is put together is precisely why it's so powerful.
Yeah. I mean, one thinks of the scene, I won't say what happens exactly, where the boy and the girl are running like hell out of their village, terrified because I think the Germans have just shown up. The boy looks over his shoulder and sees a sight and what we see, which is a sight he's going to take to his grave, and then it's face front and he's got to keep running. He has no time to process that. He has no time to stop and stare. So the director doesn't let us do it either, but it's in your head, just as it's in his head, and you can just imagine that churning away. Really, from then on for him for the rest of his life. Yeah,
for sure. I think that particularly is one of those things that once you watch that scene, it's always that you're never going to leave that alone. Yeah, I think that's very true. With regard, did you see Dunkirk?
Yes, I did.
What did you think?
I liked it. I realized straight away, or almost straight away, that it was not going to be a kind of a factual representation of what happened at Dunkirk, because to do that, really, you would have needed CGI, which I believe he was determined not to use. Yeah. You would have needed to fill the air with smoke, the beaches with smashed vehicles, the sea with ships, many of them sinking, and the sky with aircraft. There was never something not happening at Dunkirk. Yeah. What he did instead was he made something that there was very much a kind of a representation of what happened there. You had the courage, you had the cowardice, you had the betrayal, you had the decency, you had the salvation. It caught the spirit of Dunkirk with necessarily being a definite, proper representation of everything that happened. I liked it quite a bit. Plus, the Spitfires.
Oh, of course, the Spitfire, brilliant. I agree with you. I think it was really quite accomplished, and definitely because I alternate between being very impressed by Christopher Nolan and then thinking, oh man, that's the Emperor's New Clothes, really. I particularly don't like Interstellar, which essentially is hooked around a MacGuffin that he's too lazy to explain because he can't. So the whole thing hinges upon this mythical, like faster than light way of getting around the universe, but which they never explain because you can't explain that because it's pretty much impossible to come up with. Yeah. And the mystical elements of it, of Matthew McConaughey hiding out in a bookcase and all that kind of stuff. At that point, I was like, I'm not really feeling this, and I wasn't really feeling Tenet, because even though it was so ambitious, I think normally he's so assiduous about the rules of the universes he puts together, but I thought there was quite a lot of holes in his representation of, funnily enough, time travel, something that you're working on at the moment. Whereas there are films of his that I sit and watch them and go, oh, fuck, that was really... I mean, I really enjoyed Inception personally. I really liked the way he put the rules of that universe together. And I thought Dunkirk was just a masterclass in how you ratchet up tension and interest by simultaneously portraying 3 timelines without it becoming confusing. I mean, that was such a lot to do, to go for something that took 2 weeks to something that took 2 days, something that took 2 hours, and have them play against each other in real time.
I think it helped that he had a good cast there.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, obviously the 2 young lads, I think one of them, I'm out of touch because I've been out of the UK for so long, but one of them was a pop star.
That's absolutely right. Harry, whatever his name is, from One Direction.
But then you had the chap, the Spitfire pilot was, you know, and even though he wears the oxygen mask and the goggles and the helmet for the whole thing, you know, he just brought across that, he channeled that kind of calm, well-trained RAF pilot thing, you know, like that professional at work, you know, constantly having to recalculate his fuel, all that kind of stuff. I thought all that really helped, you know, getting the right personalities in there to help move this thing along.
Yeah. Funnily enough, you absolutely took the words out of my mouth. About my next point would have been about that Tom Hardy performance, which I think it's a very highly accomplished, and everything you've just said is true. The way Nolan put that together, because you would think that essentially a very sort of compelling actor like him, who has his complete face covered for the whole thing. So all the usual box of tricks, although he has done it before when he played Bane, I guess, but all that box of tricks, he radiates exactly what you've just said, that high-level RAF training. And your heart's in your mouth, I think, at the end of that movie, when it ultimately resolves with the sequence that involves him. You're thinking, holy fuck, you know, are you going to crash? Are you going to get the plane down? Are they going to, you know, you're really in it by that point.
And when he does take the mask off and you do see his face and he's watching the Spitfire burn, and you see that when he's captured, he doesn't even deign to notice them.
Yeah.
He doesn't look at them because they're not worth his time.
Yeah.
They drag him away and he's a prisoner, but they're beneath him. I thought he accomplished something pretty special in that little moment there. That was good.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, he for years he was one of those actors that thought, well, you know, is all this stuff about Tom Hardy is kind of hyperbole. But then each performance of his I would watch, I would think, and I have this feeling about Leonardo DiCaprio, by the way, completely different actor, who I would have always said a couple of years ago, I'm not really a big fan of his, but every time I watch him in something, I'm like completely absorbed with what he does. You know, and even though I wouldn't describe myself as a fan, I think those 2 guys, 2 very different actors, have put together kind of a breadth of performances that are so accomplished, you can't help but respect them. Do you know what I mean?
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
I fucking love that film, mate.
Tremendous. He was absolutely tremendous. That's my favorite movie of the last couple of years. I've enjoyed the last few movies anyway, but that one, that was icing on the cake. I can't think of anyone else making movies today who so expertly communicates the absolute joy he has in filmmaking, in being able to do these things, you know, in getting actors to do stuff and getting these lines of dialogue out there, putting them in people's mouths, putting these scenes together, these highly unlikely, ridiculous, over-the-top scenes. There's no one else who seems to be thinking in those terms at the moment except him.
Oh no, he's an army of one. I couldn't agree more about that film. That is far and away my favourite film of 2019. Absolutely nothing comes close. And I think it was the first time I saw it. And actually, in a sec, I'll tell you about the second time I saw it, which is kind of a similar deal. But the first time I saw it was one of those times where you experience genuine euphoria in the cinema.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I was like, I would love to be there in that moment, like with one of my mates driving that car around LA in 1969. I would fucking love to experience that. And I so completely enjoyed it. There's I'm sure we could do an hour of one of these things just talking about that film, because it is so rich and there are so many beats and there are so many moments. I mean, their chemistry, it's so beautifully cast, the whole film, but their chemistry is so spot on. And that to me is a complete distillation of, when you have those friends, I'm a bloke, so I can only talk about it from a male perspective. But when you have those male friendships, that there's years of shorthand encoded in it, and you genuinely like each other's company. And you're different, but there's a mutual respect there. There's a lot of joy to be had in those moments, right? And you can see them just savoring each other's company, whether it's good times or whether it's bad times or whether it's moments of extremity. And I think one of the things he does really well, because it touches upon things I'm very interested in, like the old Western era at Warner Brothers and whatnot in the 50s and all those movies. He does the recreations so well, and if they're not exact recreations, they're created in a way that you just really want to savor it and enjoy it.
Because he lives and breathes that, and he wants to bring it alive in that way.
I mean, one of the things he does is the way he puts the Tarantino stamp on everything. So the scenes from Bounty Law are completely authentic when you look at any of those old Warner Brothers Westerns. At one point, I think Warner Brothers had 7 Westerns on the go at the same time, including things like Sugarfoot and Maverick, of course, and all that. Literally 7 Westerns on the air. And it looks a lot like Wanted, Dead or Alive, the Steve McQueen show. But he puts that Tarantino twist on things. So there's actually a lot more death in those clips than you would ever see on network television in the 50s, right?
Yeah, it's just exaggerated to the point that it makes you laugh, but in the sense that all he's done is taken something very familiar a little bit further, bang, 4 guys fall off the horses. He nailed that perfectly.
Oh, yeah, absolutely right, mate. And what I love about when you see it the first time, because, you don't know what he's going to do, but you know what it's based on, the Manson killings. So that, it, like he always does, he is an expert in mixing tones on screen and is proficient at it in a way I've never seen anybody be able to do it like he can do it. And the way he can rock it back and forth with all these emotions. But you're watching that amazing extended scene where Brad Pitt goes out to Spahn Ranch, and everything takes a very sinister tone of foreshadowing. Suddenly you don't know if he's going to get out of there alive. And as you're watching it in real time, it's like, oh, holy fuck, what's going to happen? Things have taken a dark turn. And then it starts out amusing, becomes very dark, suspenseful. It ends on an amusing note. But that sets you up for the final scene, where you're thinking things again start feeling darker and darker and darker, which he then resolves with this incredibly violent humor and acts of violence that outside of that heightened world he's created. You'd be going, oh, holy fuck, that's too much. You can't watch Brad Pitt brutally beating a woman to death. And yet I was sat in a cinema full of young women, full of a mixed audience who are laughing their asses off at that scene as it went down. To me,
it's a brilliantly made scene, and we're left in no doubt about the incredible sinister evil of those characters. They may come off like bungling idiots in the car, and I do like it when one girl gets out and just runs
and legs it.
But you're left in no doubt that these are very bad people who deserve what they get. You just wish Charlie had been with them. That would have been nice.
Right. Oh no, you do for sure. It's supremely cathartic when you see that happen, because up until that very moment, you've got this fear gnawing away at you that you're going to see something appalling on screen.
Yes.
And and it washes over you with that, because it's funny when he did the same trick in Inglourious Bastards, which is for me a movie that I half like. I really wanted to see Tarantino's Men on a Mission movie, and if it had been that, I would have just been jerking off in the cinema. I would have loved it, for me, it always kind of ground to a halt with the Paris scenes and the cinema scenes and all that. As proficient as they are, it wasn't really what I wanted to see, right?
Yeah, I was almost the opposite. I liked that movie so long as the Inglourious Bastards weren't in it.
Right, okay.
I just found them annoying as hell. I I like the stuff with the evil SS officer, the Jew hunter.
Yeah, he was brilliant. Yeah.
I particularly like the scene in the basement, with making a mess of things when he orders the whiskey. In fact, I thought
with Fassbender, he was phenomenal, right?
He was the best thing in it. Watching that movie, it made me feel like if you were enjoying a particularly good issue of Hellblazer or something, and you flip the page and they've put the Justice League in it.
Yeah, yes.
Oh, you've ruined it. Every time showed up, that's what it was like. That, of course, that is an experience that you can now enjoy.
Yeah, thank you.
Could you wish to?
Yeah.
Or at least, you were able to around that time. But that was the last movie he made that I didn't enjoy. After that, Django, and then The Hateful Eight.
Hateful Eight's amazing. Yeah,
they're those three in a row are excellent.
Yeah, I completely agree. They're supremely accomplished. I guess to close out Inglourious Bastards, my issue with that was, among the ones I've just mentioned, is that the thing about him changing history in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I found super cathartic and a relief. Yeah. And I was like washed over with, thank Christ, we're not going to see all that fucking horrible shit. Yeah, brilliant. Great. So everybody's like, I remember watching everybody get file out the cinema, and everybody was on a high at the end of that movie, at the end of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. With Inglourious Bastards, once he went into Tarantino-verse history, my issue with that was every other war movie I've ever seen, even if it's insanely over the top and cartoonish, like Where Eagles Dare, which I love, and like Kelly's Hero, which I love, like The Dirty Dozen, which I love, they still don't change the basic fucking facts of the war, right? So it felt like such a narrative cheat to me, because I was aware of the fact that the movie had to be ending in the next 10 minutes. And we're in that fucking theatre, and they're there with Hitler, and I'm like, this film's going to finish any minute now. How the fuck are they going to get out of this? How are they going to do? I just don't get it. And then when they waste Hitler, which is enjoyable to watch some machine gun in his face to bits. That's a nice beat. But it's like, I see. The way you resolve this is just by changing fucking history. So everything I've been expecting, it was a much less clever resolution than I would have previously expected from him. I thought he was going to do something, where I'd be like, holy cats off, man, that was very clever. It's just like, I see. So you're just going to kill Hitler. That was a massive disappointment to me. There's
Christoph Waltz, whose character is, evil incarnate, who they could have legitimately killed. Yeah. And instead, they brutalized him a bit. They cut a swastika into his head. Now, that's no fun, and I wouldn't like it to happen, but at the end of the day, that guy's made a deal with US intelligence to go and live in the States, presumably enjoying the life of Riley. And he's got a swastika in his head. Well, plastic surgery, sort that out. And that to me is this weird sort of pointless twist that the film takes. Yeah, where I'm thinking you have set this character up as unimaginably appalling. He's tortured and terrorized all these poor people. He's responsible for so many murders and so on, but ultimately he gets away with it. Yeah. Something weird going on there.
No, I couldn't agree more, because I really thought that what he was setting up is that, you have a character called the Jew Hunter, and you have a character, the Eli Roth character, who's the Burr Jew, who you've shown his thing is physically beating Germans to a pulp. So I thought the conclusion was going to be watching Christoph Waltz in gruesome detail get beaten to death and liquidized on camera by Eli Roth, and that would feel amazing. And you'd be like, that fucker got everything he deserved, and you'd feel good, right? You don't need to kill Hitler, you know. So I completely agree, and yet that never happened.
No.
Yeah. So it's very disappointing. Just to flip back to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So I've got this second time I saw it. I've got this friend who works for the studios in LA. He works in licensing. He's a dude called Chris Lucero, like really good Italian American bloke. And he's worked in the movie business for quite a long time. And he's one of these guys who's really into his cinema, So he's gone to the tailors in London where he's got a replicated version of like Sean Connery's 3-piece suit and Goldfinger, all that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
It's a level of movie fandom I would never go to personally.
That's too much for me.
But that's his thing, right? But I said after I saw it, he's LA born and raised. And in fact, he's like born and raised in Toluca Lake in Burbank. And I was like, man, you've got to go and see this. And he was like, you know what? I'm not going to bother because I've kind of gone off Tarantino. I don't really like Brad Pitt that much and don't really like Leonardo DiCaprio that much. I was like, mate, I'm telling you, you of all people, this is like a love letter to Burbank, like a love letter to Hollywood. You just got to trust me and you've got to go. And he's like, okay, I'll do it. And then like literally 3 months later, in the middle of the night, it's about 4 a.m. in London, I get a phone call from him. And he's like, holy fuck, I've just been to see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It is amazing. It's the film of the year. You're dead right. It's fucking brilliant. And he was just great. We were on the phone for about half an hour. The next time I went to LA for work purposes, he was like, I want to take you out and do something. And he took me to see the movie for a second time at the New Beverly, which is like Tarantino's cinema in Los Angeles. Yeah. So we go see that. And then he takes me for dinner at one of the Mexican restaurants that features in the movie, you know, in that booth where they sit when they get shit-faced before they have the. So that was my second time seeing it, which was, you know, for different reasons, as euphoric as the first time. Yeah. But I really think it is one of those films that really, you know, like lights that fire of absolute devotion and a certain brand of genre fan. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the kind of thing that, honestly, because it is, much as I enjoyed them, it is better than his last two as well. Like it takes things to another level. The kind of thing that I didn't think I was going to see again anytime soon.
Yeah.
That is, you said, lights the fire that way.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting to see something like that again at all.
No, mate, I couldn't agree more. And I think on that note, that's a good place to wrap up for this time around. And thanks for joining me. Thanks for joining me for Hard Agree, Garth, and thanks for getting into your new projects and a subject close to both of our hearts, which is World War II entertainment and war movies. It's been great chatting to you, mate.
All right, cheers, Andrew. Thank you.
Take care of yourself, brother. I'll see you soon.
You too, mate. Cheers.
And that wraps us up for that. Thanks, mate. That was great.
All right.
That was awesome. I mean, you know, if you enjoyed that chat, I'd love to do another one and get to some of the. I mean, I realised that I think there's a lot of this movie stuff and a lot of those other genres that we could talk about. I wanted to get into Sam Fuller, which I don't know if you've seen any of his.
I saw The Big Red one years ago.
Yeah. So Big Red one's great. I would recommend, if you ever get a chance to check it out, you should check out the two Korean War movies he made, like back to back, in round about 1950. And the first one is The Steel Helmet, which is often referenced by Tarantino.
Oh, yeah.
And the second one is Fixed Bayonets. And Fixed Bayonets happens in winter. And they both star a guy called Gene Evans, who is a well-known like utility player, like character actor. But the Steel Helmet, they're shot on minuscule budgets, I think somewhere out in California. But the thing about Fuller was, like Kirby, he was a frontline infantryman, and you know, famously, he never shouted action. He used to fire a pistol at the start of every scene, right? And all his films are like high extreme melodrama, but they're also rooted in a kind of realism of his like GI experience. And they're both about like fucking, I don't know, 70, 80 minutes long.
So Steel Helmet and Fixed Bayonets.
Yes, check them out, mate, because I'm sure you'd enjoy them. And in Fixed Bayonets, Gene Evans' his lead character is Sergeant Rock, funnily enough, and it's got a similar name, not dissimilar name in the first one. They're very much of a piece, but they have a kind of bleak emotional reality to them. You know, given the fact that it was shot within the Hollywood system in 1950. You know what I mean? Yeah. So if you're up for doing another one of these or another couple of these in the future, we will.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, great, mate. I'll be in touch about doing some Forbidden Planet TVs to line up the new books.
Great.
All right, mate. You enjoyed the rest of your Sunday. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
You too, Andrew. Cheers.
Take care, brother. All the best.
See ya.
Yeah, cheers, mate.
You've been listening to Hard Agree.
This episode was edited by John Horsley and Kenrick Regan, and our theme music, Golden, was written and performed for this show by Liverpool's finest band, DENIO. Our Degree is a production of the Spoilerverse and myself, Andrew Sumner.